Well, today we're going to present you about NOM-018-STPS-2000 Identification of hazards and risks due to chemical substances. The team is constituted from Barranco Cruz, Guillén Cruz, Palacio Rodriguez, and Villa Lizárraga. Well, onto the presentation. First of all, of objective is to establish the minimum requirements of a system for identification and communication of hazards and risks due to dangerous chemicals, according to their physical, chemical, and toxicity characteristics, concentration, and also exposure time that may affect the health of workers or produce a damage in the workplace. Or scope. This standard applies through the national territory and applies in all work centers where hazardous chemical substances are handled, transported, or stored. This standard is not applicable to finished products that are already for commercialization, nor to vehicular transport outside the workplace. In these cases, the provisions of the legislation trade, health, and communication and transport must be complied with. This standard does not apply to products whose degree of health, risk, flammability, and reactivity is 0, according to the criteria established in Appendix E or F. References. For the correct interpretation of this standard, the following current official Mexican standards should be consulted. Sistema General de Unidades de Medidas, NOM-008-STPS 1993, NOM-004-SCT2-1994, Sistema de Identificación de Unidades destinados al transporte terrestre de materiales y residuos peligrosos, NOM-005-STPS-1998, relativo a las condiciones de seguridad de los centros de trabajo para el manejo, transporte y almacenamiento de sustancias químicas peligrosas, and finally, NOM-010-STPS-1990, condiciones de seguridad e higiene en los centros de trabajo donde se manejan, transporten, procesen o almacenen sustancias químicas capaces de generar contaminación en el medio ambiente laboral.
Then we have the obligations of the employer, which it has the obligation to show the work authority when requests the information and documents that the standard requires to prepare or possess. Then also identify the deposits, containers, and areas that contain dangerous chemical substance or their residues with the marking established in Chapter 7. Then communicate the hazards and risks to all workers in the workplace and contractor personnel who are exposed to hazardous chemical substance according to the identification system established in Chapter 7, and maintain a record of the workers who have been informed. You also have the obligation to know the degree of danger and the risk of hazardous chemicals used in the workplace. So the following must be complied with. Have the SDS for all hazardous chemical substances used in the workplace, in accordance with the provisions of Appendix C. Then, deliver to their clients the SCDs of the dangerous chemical substance that they acquire, for which they must require announcement of receipt. Then we have other, which capacitate in the hazard and risk identification and communication system, complying with the first one, provide at least once a year training to all workers who handle hazardous chemicals, and each time a new hazardous chemical is used in the workplace or the process is modified. Keep a record of the last training given to each worker. And finally, deliver the respective training certificates to workers who request it.
Okay, so up next we are going to talk about the obligations of the workers. First of all, to put up ourselves in context, I'm going to offer you a little definition of what is a worker. It is a person who carries out work in any capacity for a business or employer. The employer is the topic we saw before. Or it can be defined with other words as a person conducting a business undertaking. They can be an employee, a trainee. Some obligations of them is to participate in communication and training provided by the employer and follow the instructions of the hazard risk and identification, and also communication system of hazardous chemical substances. As we have seen here, as the obligation of the employers is to communicate the hazardous substances to its employees, it's the obligation of the workers to follow these rules or these signals. And another one is to inform the employer of any risk conditions that they detect and that they can't correct themselves by following the corresponding procedures as they follow on the training. Then we have the identification system. This is, as we mentioned, to identify the dangers and risk of hazardous chemical substances. The rectangle model or the rhombus model must be used at the choice of the employer and comply with the marking and identification as established in the Appendix A. The rectangle model in accordance with the provisions of Appendix E, and the rhombus model in accordance with the provision of Appendix F. And then we have the alternative system. The employer can use this system to direct in alternative to rectangle and the rhombus models. It complies with the objective and purpose of this standard with prior authorization granted by the Secretaría del Trabajo y Prevención Social through the Dirección General de Seguridad y Higiene del Trabajo, in accordance with the provision of Article 49 of the Federal Law on Metrology and Standardization and the 8 of the Federal Regulation of Safety, Hygiene, and Work Environment. And as we have been mentioning the training, it has also a communication system. This hazardous chemical and risk communication and training system should consist of: number one, the identification and signaling of risk according to according to Chapter 7, training and communication to workers according to Appendix B, and finally, but not least important, the SDS of hazardous chemicals that is used in the workplace according to the Appendices C and D.
Finally, we will talk about the verification units. The employer will have the option of hiring an accredited and approved verification unit, as established in the Federal Law on Metrology and Standardization, to verify compliance with this standard. The verification units may verify compliance with this standard in sections 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, and 5.5. The verification unit must deliver the opinion to the employer in accordance with the provisions of Section 9.5. The validity of the favorable opinions issued by the verification units will be 2 years, as long as no dangerous chemical substances are added to those used in the workplace. The opinions issued by the verification units must contain at least the following information: data of the evaluated work center, name, denomination or company name, full address, and the name and signature of the legal representative. Verification unit data: name, denomination or company name of the verification unit, accreditation number granted by the accreditation entity, approval number granted by the STPS, code and name of the verified standard, date on which accreditation and approval was granted, determination of the degree of compliance of the workplace with this standard and, where appropriate, exceptions determined by the verification unit. Result of verification. Name and signature of the legal representative. Place and date of signature and validity of the opinion. These are all the points that a verification unit data and the data of Evaluate Work Center must contain in order to apply to this standard. That will be the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening.